Colts Nation, if helmets or helmet accessories interest you, make sure to go to greengridiron.com and use code INDSYN at checkout to get the discount code with it. Whether it's mini helmets, full-size helmets, visors, clips, whatever it may be, different face masks, different variations of helmets, alternate helmets, whatever the case, you can get it at Green Gridiron. And again, that's code INDSYN at checkout for the discount. Thanks for stopping by for another video. And now let's get into it. What's going on, Colts Nation? I appreciate you joining me as we're back here. Gonna have more conversations about what's coming up here for the Colts. Of course, we just talked a little bit yesterday about Anthony Richardson and him needing to develop. That's the most important thing for us this offseason. But another very important thing for the Colts this offseason is going to be, what do we do with the defense? And of course, that starts with the defensive coordinator, right? I think we've all felt like for a while that we have a good amount of talent on the team. I know there are going to be people that disagree with that. A decent amount of talent on the team, people at all levels, but we need a new defensive coordinator. Now we're going to get it with Gus Bradley, his contract running up, not fired like I thought, right? But all the same, he's not coming back. Whatever the case, Gus Bradley was told, hey, you're going out of the building. Let's not have you back, buddy. Okay, so whatever the case, he's gone. We finally got rid of Gus Bradley one way or another. We don't have to owe him any. That was probably what that was when we were changing leadership. There was probably a decision like, hey, for continuity purposes, let's keep Gus here, let his contract run out, and then we'll see what happens if the defense improves under the new staff. Then we'll find a way to keep Gus Bradley. That didn't happen. So now there are going to be options. There are a lot of options through this offseason of guys that we're going to be able to interview, guys that we're going to be able to talk to see, hey, can we get these guys in for a job in the offseason? There's one name that we've all said, Robert Saleh, that is not mentioned, at least to this point. I've not heard anything about Robert Saleh possibly meeting with an NFL team, right? He's currently helping the Packers. Is there going to be any sort of defensive coordinator position that he heads towards? Is he just going to stay with the Packers and find like an actual job on the Packers? Is that the plan there, right? They have a young defensive coordinator at the Packers, a guy that came from college, right? He was at Michigan. I believe he was a Michigan defensive coordinator and went to the NFL, right? Went to the Packers, young guy. So maybe they bring in Saleh and have those two work together. I don't know what the plan is. I have not heard Robert Saleh. But even with that, there are a lot of other names, really interesting names. And even talking about one of the guys we just talked about, Michigan defensive coordinators. We'll talk about that here in a few minutes. But some of the other names, and a couple of these are pretty obvious, but a couple of others that even I'm going to need to look into. But this is just names that have come up to this point. And so far we have former Saints defensive coordinator made head coach Dennis Allen. Okay, and Dennis Allen has a good amount of experience, in the NFL in general, right? Which is, I think, one thing our defensive or our coaching staff as a whole, right? Of course, we had Gus Bradley and some experienced guys on the defensive staff, but I think Dennis Allen coming in obviously doesn't run a defense like a carbon copy of what Gus is doing, right? He brings in a different philosophy. A guy that will play his best players, doesn't have to operate on a rotation. If he has great players, he plays them, right? He's a guy who comes from a team where he had, Cam Jordan for a time. Marcus Davenport was on that defensive line. I know there are other names that at the current moment is slipping me, but me personally, a fan of a lot of the guys. They had some dogs over there on that Saints defense, still do, right? Demario Davis and some other guys. Marshawn Lattimore obviously getting traded. He's dealt with injuries, but nonetheless, Dennis Allen had some talent in New Orleans to be able to coach there on the defensive side, but those defenses were always really good. It's why they continue to be $80 million in the hole every year over there in New Orleans, because they're trying to retain a bunch of these vets, and a bunch of those vets are on the defensive side. A bunch of these really good veteran players are on the defensive side of the football. So Dennis Allen, again, he's been working with some really good players and coming over to Indy. Will this be a job that interests him, right? Again, this is a guy that was just a head coach and got let go. Obviously, Rizzi, I think Dan Rizzi ended up filling in, finished the season for the Saints at head coach. But nonetheless, Dennis Allen has experience in the NFL, head coach experience in the NFL, I believe multiple times head coach experience in the NFL. And of course, a very experienced defensive coordinator could come in, be like an assistant head coach, right? Defensive coordinator, assistant head coach, that kind of role, right? Just like Dan Campbell. When Dan Campbell was in New Orleans, Dan Campbell was, I believe, tight ends coach, but he was also assistant head coach. Right. So I think something like that could be good working, especially the offensive and defensive play caller being head coach, assistant head coach, and those two working that closely in conjunction and the offense and defense like that marriage seems like it could be great. And that's what a lot of Colts fans are saying right now. And I'm somebody who I'll look more into like exactly how these defenses run. But for right now, a big one for us right now is going to be Dennis Allen, name that's coming up, and he should be on the Colts list of guys that we end up interviewing. You would at least assume that that'll come up, right? There's also Jeff Ulbrich, right, coming out of the Jets. Now, Robert Saleh was with the Jets, and Ulbrich was calling the plays, right? So after that point, right, when Ulbrich had to go to head coach and roles changed, Saul is not there anymore, Ulbrich's doing more, Jets defense fell off a cliff. And I'm not going to put that on Ulbrich. I think he ran. I mean, there was a lot of talent on those teams. Right, that Jets defense is just loaded with ridiculous talent. But Ulbrich's another one of those guys. Like he's going to play his best 11, and he believes in that. He'll use his rotation as he needs to, but his studs are going to be on the field, and I like that, right? And then again, these other guys, not as sure about and don't know as much about these guys. But again, I will look into this. These interviews are going to begin happening next week, I believe. And these guys, the guys that I'm listing right now, these are just guys that we should be looking into. There are other guys that news came out today we're actually going to be doing interviews with, right? But these other guys, and shout out to Zach Hicks. These are coming from Zach Hicks. The first two could come from anybody. Anybody can bring those up, but he brings up Chris Harris, Titans PGC, Aubrey Pleasant, the Rams PGC, and Jim Leonard, Broncos PGC. If you're wondering what PGC is, of course, that is passing game coordinator. So those three are names to possibly watch, maybe names that are just getting into the interview cycle this time around, and maybe somebody will find a home somewhere. But nonetheless, those are the guys that are available. And then as I sit here just scrolling up so I can find it, here we go. Tom Pelissero put out the news today. The Colts have begun their defensive coordinator search with former Bengals defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo and longtime NFL coach Steve Wilks among those expected to interview this week. Now, of course, the last time we saw both of these guys, right, not great, and a lot of people are not going to like that. Right, when you look at Lou Anarumo and what the Bengals defense was this year, they were one of the worst, maybe the worst in the NFL. The best offense in the NFL. If I have to say so myself, the Bengals offense was ridiculous, and they weren't able to get into the playoffs because their defense was so bad. Not necessarily listen, they lost a lot of talent over the last couple of years. The Bengals have done a bad job reconstructing the roster with what they're paying Joe Burrow and what they're going to need to pay these receivers, right? The offensive line to protect Burrow. The defense has suffered. I'm not going to put it on Lou because in years past, that Bengals defense had been one of the better defenses in the NFL. So not perfect. So again, I'll look more into Lou, exactly how he runs his defense. I did see somebody say that Lou Anarumo, I believe it was Lou Anarumo. Or no, I'm sorry, it was somebody said that Robert Saleh runs a similar scheme to Gus Bradley. So I'll look into Lou Anarumo. What does he do? Of course, like all these guys, what do they do? How do their defenses generally run? What are we looking like? Do they disguise? Do they run multiple coverages? That sort of thing. I'll look for that as quickly as I possibly can. Try to get as much information on these guys as I possibly can. And then, of course, Steve Wilks, last time we saw him, I believe, was when he went to San Francisco to be the defensive coordinator, and it just wasn't a good fit, right? Him and Shanahan, like the defense, they had studs on the defense, even though, the 49ers are generally one of the more injured teams in the league, and they were that season, specifically on the defensive side of the football. And, Steve Wilks, it falls on the sword. It just seemed like that entire season on the 49ers, there was some issues anyway. So it kind of made sense when they came out and said, he just doesn't fit here kind of thing. Him and Shanahan not on the same page and not seeing eye to eye, whatever the case may be. So we'll see what happens with these guys. Those are the interviews that are expected to happen for the Colts. At this point, I believe those are the only announced interviews, and we'll see what happens as time goes on. Who else is going to interview? And of course, again, I'm going to look into these guys and try to come up with like a realistic list of, hey, these are the guys like coming off of Gus Bradley with the players that we have on our roster. Like, who do we bring in here that can make us the best version of ourselves and really accentuate the things that the guys on our defense does well, instead of bringing in a guy who, like, every guy's going to have their playbook, every guy's going to have their system, but how much can you just take what you do and then take your players and mold the two together? Which coordinator is going to do that? Which coordinator do I believe will give us the best chance to do that? That's what I'm going to look into, and I'm going to report back to you guys. I got to get more of a list of, hey, who could we possibly look at throughout this offseason? I actually didn't even save the other stuff that I was looking at, right? I had heard Wink Martindale, the current defensive coordinator for the Michigan Wolverines, of course, been in the league for a long time, was with the Ravens there for a little while, was with the Giants. That didn't go well, but of course, not his fault. They've done a terrible job building that team. It's an awful team and has been for years. So don't really blame Wink Martindale. It's kind of crazy that team was so bad that Wink said, is anybody actually professional in the NFL, and went to college football. So we'll see. Can we pull him out of college football, pull him away? Which, whatever, I kind of like, as a Michigan fan, I kind of like having Wink Martindale there, an NFL guy, studs on the defense for Michigan. Like, we're coming back. So whatever, if he comes to the Colts, that'd be cool. I wanted Wink Martindale a few years ago when I was ready to be done with Gus Bradley. So if that happens, I'm perfectly happy for it. He'll attack. He'll be multiple. He runs a different scheme, and we'll have to see what happens. How would roster construction be different with a guy like Wink Martindale? And that does play in to which coach we end up going with. But again, I'll look into it. There was something else. Someone mentioned Rex Ryan. That's ridiculous. Man, who else was it? It was Wink Martindale, Rex Ryan, and I think, man, who was it? I'm going to look up Albert Breer. It was him who put it out. I'm going to just scroll his Twitter here. Hopefully we can find it. Okay, I finally found it. The other name was actually Steve Wilks was the name mentioned. So maybe there is more of a connection with Steve Wilks. There are a lot of people talking about Lou Anarumo, who was a popular defensive coordinator over the last couple of years. We'll see what happens. Can the Colts make the right decision? I think this is going to be a massive decision. I think on the offensive side of the ball, like, when you go past Shane, I think we have a lot of different, like, position coaches that are really good. Reggie Wayne, Tony Sperano Jr. at the top of that list. Like, I think our position coaches are really good. I just think, of course, the defense staff needs overhauled. Some of the roster needs overhauled. There needs to be more competition. I heard Mo Ali Cox say that, one of the things he's looking forward to in free agency is like exploring somewhere where he's going to be able to win, and feels like there hasn't been, enough change here, right? It's been the same thing every year, and he's right. We've been middle of the pack for so long. And ever since the AFC South, I saw at Scony Colt, shout out to him, one of the best follows on Colts Twitter. He said that he ended up looking it up, and it turns out the Colts, since the AFC South came to be, the Colts have only been dead last in the AFC South one time. But in the same vein, we haven't won the division in 10 years. So a lot of time sitting in the middle of the pack here for the Colts after a long reign of dominance in the AFC South. So for the Colts going forward, man, it's going to be big figuring out what we do with personnel. What do we do with coaches? Who do we bring in? And again, I'm going to be doing the research. I'm going to be looking stuff up. There are other conversations that have to be had. And I'm finally getting to a spot where I'm going to have some time. I'm going to have some time. I'll record some videos. We're going to talk about this stuff. So make sure you're subscribed and make sure you have notifications on. Have those notifications on so you get notified anytime we drop any content. Save that thing to your watch later. When notifications pop up, you can get to it later. That's okay, as long as you know it's coming. So, of course, hit that like button as well. I appreciate you guys stopping by for another video. And as always, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and go Colts.